and welcome to the Reign of Blood podcast, brought to you by the Reign of Blood Festival team. So this is the podcast where you get a behind-the-scenes look at the con and the sharps and blood kinksters all over the world who will be celebrating with us. So this podcast is intended for mature audiences who have an interest in blood and sharps-based kinks only. So if that's not you, then this podcast definitely is not for you. So these are real stories from real kinksters, and so they may contain discussions surrounding things like health, mental health, kink, blood, self-harm, traumatic experiences, and more. So if you're having a rough day or these topics could be distressing for you, then we would advise you to come back when you're more ready to enjoy the topic with us.
Hey, my amazing sharps lovers. It's Miss Kitten, and I'm back for the Reign of Blood podcast. And tonight, joining me in my dungeon virtually from far across the sea, is a really incredible human. You might know who he is. JustRob, welcome to my dungeon, and thank you so much for putting up with all the chaos that managed to get us here. I'm really privileged to be able to chat to you, and I feel like fangirling a little bit on this side of the country.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, we've had a couple of misstarts here and having this conversation, but I'm glad we finally got to get together.
Yeah, and I'm actually glad I got to speak to you after Reign of Blood, because I absolutely loved your barbed wire class, and you've been one of my heroes in the scene. I think I stalked you when I was a young kitten and learning about all these things. So to actually be able to chat to you and ask you all my million questions is super. Before I ruin the podcast by asking you all the questions I wanted to ask you for a million years, maybe you can give the listeners a little bit about your journey and how you got started and how you found sharps.
Sure. So, in general, I found the lifestyle. I've been active publicly since 2008. I went to a munch. I was sort of the typical alone, sort of weird, kind of neckbeardy, sort of nerdy guy. I sort of figured out that the reason I wasn't getting on with women was because my proclivities were odd and violent, but not in a serial killer way, but more in a power exchangey kind of way, right? And so I started looking online, and I found FetLife. And so I went on FetLife and I found a munch in my area, and I connected with the person who led the munch in my area, and I went to the munch in my area and I met people. The first munch I went to, I met the woman who would become my wife. I met a bunch of people who I still know today. Another person who is one of my partners now. So yeah, I did that. I spent a couple years kind of just going to parties, going to events, trying to learn stuff. I didn't really know anything about what I was into or what I wanted to do. Really what side of the slash I was on. I wanted to learn. The one thing I knew I wanted to do was I didn't want to fuck it up, right? And I'm a very much a try to learn as much as you can kind of person. I'm a research-oriented, read all the books, watch all the videos kind of person, right? So I tell new people now, I spent 3 years before I touched a flogger, before I did any kind of play, just going to events, going to play parties, talking to people, asking questions, trying to learn, like, what are all these kinks and how do people play and what are people into and why do people want to do this kind of stuff, right? I started out in Impact. I figured, I tried everything. I figured out that I was really more of a top than a bottom. Tried everything, sort of figured out I liked Impact. I figured out I liked electricity. I thought the sharps and the blood players were actually pretty weird. I wasn't sure that I really was going to be into that. And then I had a play partner who was a nurse, and she liked to be pierced. and she didn't have any tops. There weren't any tops around really that she trusted that to pierce her. And I was her impact top, and she would regularly come over to my house to do cathartic impact. And so one day she was like, "Hey, do you do needles?" And I was like, "No, like that's not really my thing." And she's like, "Well, why not?" And I was like, I don't really know anything about it. And it's like, I don't, yeah. And she's like, "Come on, dude, I'm a nurse. Like I do this shit every day. Like I could teach you everything you need to know." And I was like, "Well, okay, like, you want it. And like, I mean, I don't have a aversion to it. Like, I'm not afraid of needles. I'm not, okay, sure." Like, and so she acquired, and I'm using big air quotes with my fingers. She acquired all the stuff that we needed from the hospital that she worked at. And the next play date, she came over and she brought all the stuff over, and she, taught me basic, skin prep, taught me how to wash my hands properly, how to put gloves on and stuff. And then basically, said, "Hey, okay, let's do this." Turned me into a pincushion, right? And so I put some needles in her, and the first time I pulled the needle out, and she bled, and the first time that I got to touch it, and the first time she made that sound when I put a needle in her, it was over. Like I was like that. I was like that. I was like, this is it. Like this is like, yeah. I don't need to buy any more floggers. I don't need to buy any more little doohickeys to plug into my violet wand. It's over. Like I still do that stuff, and I still really like it, and it's still a cool way for me to make connections with people. But the way that is the most rewarding for me to make connections with people is through Sharps play. And since then, it was my soul. It was not my sole focus, but pretty much off to the races in terms of learning everything I could, and seeking people out, researching things, trying to learn all I could, and find people who knew things, and find people who would let me would learn with me. So that's pretty much it.
I love that, Rob. My absolute coming home moment was my first needle session, so I so relate to that. And I also love the way you spent some time getting to know who you were in the community and researching the stuff that you wanted to try. I have a lot of respect for that. I think admin is one of my kinks. You won't believe that as a human being after I've managed to mess up the recording date twice. But I really like having all the information, and I think it's the one thing that's kept me sane and relatively safe in the community, because I could trust myself going into a situation. So really just appreciate hearing that, and I think that's great advice for anybody starting out in the community and starting out in Sharps. You have before we go into the whole Sharps journey, just too much, I've been stalking you again because I do that, and you have this amazing quilt that has been popping up on your page, and I've been seeing stuff about it, and I'm desperate to ask you what that's about, and if you can give me a little bit of the history. And for a South African with very little community, it's incredible to see something like that taking shape, and I'd just love to know more. So if you would share it, I'd be very grateful.
Absolutely. So that's a project I got involved in a couple years ago. We call it the Leather Quilt. All over the world, but primarily in North America here, we have the leather community, which is a subset of the BDSM community. The leather community, is a big set of groups, right? So you've got leather clubs and houses and just different sorts of groupings of people that are grouped in different ways, right? Part of the leather culture is that, your group has a insignia, right? Like a like a logo, right? And part of it is, you wear a vest or something that has a big patch on it that has your insignia, kind of like you're showing, who you are or what the group you belong to, right? About I guess it's been about 20 years ago now. Yeah, I think so. A group out on the West Coast started an effort to sort of collect and sort of codify these insignia, right? To sort of say, okay, like, this is a rich part of our culture, is this physical manifestation, these insignia. And so they started asking people, hey, would you, take one of your patches and put it on a leather square and give it to us, and we're going to put it on like a little quilt, right? And they did that, and it exploded like in popularity. People loved the idea of it. People wanted to participate. And so it went from being a little regional thing that had, a couple panels on it. It just grew and grew and grew. And it got to the point where it sort of became its own. It basically took on a life of its own. About 2 years ago, I have an actual academic background in history, so like history research, and so even though that's not what I do in my vanilla life, and so I've always sort of been interested in how I could use that, right, in the lifestyle, and the first time I saw this artifact, right, because basically what happens is this thing travels to different leather events in the United States and Canada and is displayed. And people can go up and look at each individual panel on this quilt, right? And, they might know, oh, yeah, I know somebody in this club, or, oh, yeah, oh, I wonder what this is, right? And somebody else might know what it is, right? But it's kind of, capturing the history, right? Because these panels represent all sorts of people and all sorts of places and all kinds of walks of life. A couple of years ago, I saw this thing and I was immediately drawn to it. I immediately felt the history that was captured in it. And when I started inquiring about it, like, okay, well, let's, what is the history here? Like, where is the book, right? I was sad to learn that there was no written history. Like, there was no documentation about this artifact, like what any of these things were. Like, we had this giant quilt with all these insignia on them, and there was no documentation that anybody could read about what any of them were. And so I volunteered and said, would it be okay if I took on the task of figuring out what all of these things are and writing a history and maintaining a history for the panels on the quilt? And they said, oh, yeah, well, sure. I mean, if you want to volunteer to do all that work, fine. Like, okay, like, sure, I'm not gonna tell you to not volunteer to do a bunch of work, right? And so I started a database, and so I photographed every panel. So I took took a digital camera to an event, and I photographed every individual panel, and then built a database, and then just started figuring out what they were. Started doing Google reverse image searches, started finding people who at events that had these patches on their vests, and started asking them questions, and just started building information. And then somebody close to me became the curator of the quilt and asked me to formally become associated with the quilt and become the official digital historian for the quilt. So now I maintain a database. We've built a website, so you can go to leatherquilt.com. that has the full database for the quilt. So you can look up any panel and see a history of that panel in terms of what it represents. We're currently still having panels added, as we speak. So it's basically just a way for us to capture a history of the leather community, a way for people to sort of time capsule themselves into the leather history, and a way for us to make sure that people who don't get to go to leather events and see the actual artifact itself can go online and learn about leather history and learn about these organizations that exist and are still active today even.
Rob, I absolutely love that. I love the legacy of things, and I think you bringing the story to those who can't, who don't have the ability to attend it in real life is really beautiful. And leaving a legacy and leaving the legacy story behind just really appeals to me. A lot of the items I have learned to use in kink, I've learned to use because of their age and because of the story behind them. So they've been really critical in my development in kink, and I've bought some weird shit because it's really cool and it's like 100 years old. So I appreciate this so much, and I really hope that everybody looks this up. I'm going to drop the link to this in the bio that I add to this podcast, because I really think it deserves a look. It's quite special. It's like a whole window into a culture that I think growing up there was no internet connected to kink for me, so we sort of were very isolated in our communities. So to be able to have the internet and to be able to explore, to be able to reach out to someone like you on Zoom is so connecting. It's really quite a privilege. So yeah, this really blew my mind. I was quite chuffed with it when I saw it, and I just wish you all the best with it. And anybody who hasn't seen it, there's a photograph on Rob's page. Go and stalk him because he needs more stalkers. And
yeah. I mean, it was during the pandemic when I started teaching a lot online, one of the things I started experiencing as I started talking to people, right, and they'd tell me, I'm joining your class and I learned so much, and I was teaching, like Needle 101 classes and stuff, right? And I kept thinking, surely all of these people have already taken these classes, right? But when I talked to them, I realized the people taking these classes, here in the United States, right? The United States is a huge country, right? And the people in these classes lived in rural areas, right, where they were very physically isolated. And so they'd tell me things like, oh, where I live, the nearest munch, right, is like a 5-hour drive by car, right? So the likelihood that they're ever going to get to go attend a class where they would learn how to throw a needle, right, is minuscule, right? That Zoom class I did where I taught them like Needles 101, they were never going to get that in person, right? They don't live in like downtown Chicago. They don't live in Berlin, right? They don't live where, they just have to wait for the next needles class that's going to happen next month and just, get on the train and, go, over to the, nearest place and, drop a couple euros or a couple dollars and go to the class, right? They're never going to have that opportunity. And they were so grateful that now we were making these resources available to them. And, as the pandemic started to sort of wind down, or we started to make ourselves believe, right, that that things were safe, I started to feel bad for those people because I realized that a lot of people were going to forget about them, right? That we were going to just that a lot of people were just going to go, oh, well, now it's safe for me to go back to my, to get back on the train and to go back to my in-person classes. And so who cares about that anymore? And one of the things that I resolved was to not do that. Right. That those people, we gave those people a taste of what, the people who are privileged enough to live near these kink centers, these metropolitan centers get. And it wouldn't be fair for us to just abandon them again. Right. And so when I started with the Leather Quilt Project, that was the same thing. I was like, I'm fortunate enough. I get to look at this beautiful thing multiple times a year and go and touch it. Right. There's people that would love to understand what it is. They'll never get to see it in their entire life. They'll never get to physically look at it. Right. They still should get to see it. They should still get to learn about it and understand it, right? And we're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't, if we're just leaving all of these people out, right? And so, yeah, I think, whether that's, people within our own country who are geographically, whether that's, people who are in South Africa who don't have a community, right? Wherever that is, right? There's lots of people that, we need to use this technology to try to make sure that we're a global community, right? Not just, whoever is, close enough to me that I can, go physically see them.
I think because we've been so involved with the online education through the Reign of Blood, we've had a lot of comments about online education not being equal to in-person education. And I think there is a little bit of truth behind that. It's always great to connect with people in real life. It's always great to have those opportunities. But for so many of us, that's just not possible. Without the online community, without the connection that I have made in kink, there is no way I would be able to do the needles that I'm doing or have the opportunity to share and to collaborate like I have been if I didn't have the global community and if I didn't have access to the online resources. And restricting that education restricts the gold standard of the kink in my mind. And I think we all need, to have the basics, and we have this enormous opportunity with the internet to be able to research stuff, but this, it's still limited. Like, you can research as much as you like on needles. You're going to battle to find a needle stick video that wasn't made by Solaris, myself, or Radically Dark in the last 3 months. And I think it was only in the last 2 years that I had the resources to be able to buy a FetLife membership and see a video on FetLife on needle stick. Otherwise it was this sort of like pie in the sky theory idea. And I think it's so important that the basics are available and that we are creating, a gold standard that everybody has access to, and that there's, it's not limited because I can't kidnap Rob and bring him to South Africa and hide him in my dungeon, I mean, not that I would be thinking things like that at all, but it is illegal here, so I won't do that. But it's and I think that the online education is the other side of it is that you can watch the recording in your own time, so that you're able to then add it into your life when it fits into your life, and educate yourself instead of not educating yourself. And I just think that opportunity is so valuable. I cannot tell you what it's done for shops in my own community, how we brought the whole community together because of this global festival. It's just empowered so many people. A little bit of the legacy from all of our presenters has been left in this country and is being absorbed so willingly from so many angles. And it's just been incredible. It was incredibly powerful just to see my little community connect. I mean, my house was full with people who had traveled thousands of kilometers to come and watch it and share it and be involved in it. And then they took that back to their own communities, and they're running little needle 101s. And it's just, it's something that it's so beautiful to see it grow. so to be able to provide it, I have so much respect for what you're doing with the leather quilt. But more than that, like your attitude to online education just ticks all the boxes for me. I might stalk you not more now because, slightly more fangirling. But yeah, I know, super cool. And just the fact that education, it shouldn't be for the privileged. It should be for everybody. We should all have access to it. And we have a lot of opinions about how people kink, but we're often not sharing what we know willingly with other people. And I think that that's a big part of it. So yeah, so I'll get off the education topic because it's been a hot topic in our inboxes in the last little while about not being as good as in person. And you know what? I think what we did with Reign of Blood was better than in person because people then got time to digest it afterwards and really think about what they'd seen rather than having just one event. And we also shared across communities, so different standards, different ideas. We all came home with new perspective, and I think that's so valuable in life. I don't think that you can swap that for anything.
No, I agree. I'll tell you, one of the takeaways for me, was the top panel I was on. That might have been the most interesting and engaging panel that I've ever sat on. I get asked to sit on a lot of panels, and most of the time they're actually pretty boring. Because most of the time what happens is they ask a question gets asked, the first person that gets a chance to answer the question answers the question the way that everybody would answer it, and then two or three other people who give the same answer, but they reframe it in some other way that's trying to make themselves sound smart or trying to hide the fact that they're just saying what the last person said. And most of the time it's really, really boring. But what you managed to do with Reign of Blood is you managed to have such a cross section of people, of people from all over the world, right? Different types of sharps players that were coming at what they do from different perspectives, artistic players, technical players, more feel players, like I consider myself to be more of a connection player than giving a crap about the technical part or what it looks like, right? And then you had people like Harold, who was much more of a technical person, and then you had people who were much more artistic, right? And then you had people of different gender identities and different life experiences. And so you had people who were legitimately answering these questions with different and perfectly valid answers, right? In ways that just doesn't happen very often, because you sometimes have panels that look diverse, but they're diverse in ways that are not relevant to the panel itself, right? So you might have people who have different skin colors, right? But ultimately they're all coming at the topic from the same perspective. So even though you have diversity and inclusion, they're all saying the same thing. And so it ultimately is not that interesting. But this was inclusive and diverse from the perspective of the actual subject matter, right? And so I found that I was actually listening to what the other panelists were answering rather than just waiting for my turn to answer, right? Which is very, very rare in that situation. So yeah, I mean, but like you said, this shouldn't be for the privileged, right? This shouldn't, these types of things, one of the things, we should get off of this topic because I think we can both probably talk about it forever. But, one of the things, I teach a lot of edge play stuff, like the barbed wire stuff and saline infusion and stuff like that. And, I have other educators that ask me if I'm concerned about teaching that kind of stuff. Like, what if people hurt themselves or hurt others, right? And I always say, listen, people are going to do this shit whether we teach it or not. Right.
100%.
I ask people all the time, like, how did, needle bottoms, how did you know that you wanted to be a needle bottom? And you'll get this answer all the time. Oh, like when I was a teenager, I would sit in my room with a safety pin or a straight pin.
Mom's sewing kit.
Yeah, mom's sewing kit. And I would push needles through my skin to see what it felt like. Right. They knew that they wanted to do this when they were 15 years old. Do you think they're not going to do this stuff as an adult because we decided it's really, really dangerous and we don't want to give them the idea that they should be doing stuff?
I think
no, they're still going to do this. They're just not going to know the safety the safety things that they should be doing. And then that's going to result in them having to go to hospital, right? So what I'm doing out here is saying, I know that you want to do this crazy shit because it's fun, because I want to do it, right? I started doing all this crazy shit because I wanted to do it, right? But I wanted to learn how to do it and not harm people, right? So since I assume that you're going to do it anyway, let me help you try to do it a little bit safer. Not safe. This isn't safe or sane, right? We're fucking crazy, and we're doing shit, and we're doing shit that's dangerous. We have to accept that what we're doing is dangerous, right? But we can be a little safer, and if we can be as safe as we want to be and as safe as we can be, then that's okay, right? But I sleep fine every night knowing that, like, I'm trying to help people live the lives they want to live, and be safer about it, right? I don't think I've given anybody some crazy idea in their head that they've used to go out and harm themselves or harm others. Those people are either stupid or psychopathic, and stupid people and psychopaths are gonna hurt themselves and others regardless of what I do.
Rob, I do a lot of CBT, and in the beginning, you get to a point where you really start to consider, if this is the right thing that you're teaching other people, and you have a look at your own journey, and you're quite self-critical, and you're quite critical of your methods and stuff like that. And then one of my CBT bottoms sent me a whole bunch of links, and I spent a week going down a rabbit hole watching CBT porn, and it's free porn, so it's not controlled by content laws. So and I came back thinking, I'm in kindergarten. I know nothing. What FetLife is showing me is 1% of what is out there. And if I can translate what I do from a safety and just a disinfectant point of view and just an aftercare, self-care point of view, I can change somebody's life going forward, because they're doing it. They're doing it 1,000,000 times more than I'm ever going to do it or ever is going to fit into my risk profile. And I'm kidding myself if I think that me not teaching what I know through experience is a bad idea.
Yeah.
So and I promise you, after that week, I literally watched CBT porn for 7 days because I couldn't believe that this stuff existed. And these guys are doing it to themselves. They are recording it and they're popping it up because it's what they really want. It taught me two things. It taught me that I'm in kindergarten as far as CBT goes, and I will be in kindergarten for the rest of my life. I will never graduate, number one. And number two, if somebody truly loves pain, whether I give them the pain or somebody else gives them the pain or they give themselves the pain, really is not the question. So learning to do it in the safest way and learning a technique that brings the least amount of long-term harm to a human being is the right way for me and what I feel really strongly about in my journey. But yeah, listen, I think FetLife can be a little bit righteous in some of their claims around kink, because there are people out there that are doing it anyway, and that they're going to do it regardless, and they're doing it to maximum extreme stuff that I never even considered. So yeah. The gatekeeping is interesting. You spoke about saline, which is something that I'm quite interested in. Tell me a little bit about what you do with saline. My ears pricked up. I have a slight passion for it. It's something that we have a weird control at the moment in our community over, because it's kind of a cool thing for people to party all weekend and then have saline parties on a Sunday afternoon where they all rehydrate themselves. So we battled for about 8 months in the community to be able to purchase it, because all the medical stores, although it's not illegal to buy, weren't able to sell it to the medics, because the yuppie kids were all buying it for a Sunday afternoon party. But yeah, tell me a little bit about your journey with saline and what you do with it, and how it ticks your boxes.
Yeah. So for full disclosure, it is in the United States, it is illegal to acquire it without a prescription here. Okay. So for legal purposes, I don't have any, and I don't buy it.
Okay.
I'm winking.
I can't see the wink. It comes in your post box on a Sunday morning. It just arrives with a milkman.
Yeah. But yeah, so I do saline infusion. So I've done scrotal infusion. So to inflate the male scrotum, but primarily my what I do is for breast expansion.
Okay.
So basically what we can do is we can take in the terms of the breast, we usually can take relatively large volumes of saline, usually anywhere between 250 mil to 1.5 liters. You subcutaneously infuse it into the body to do temporary body modification. In our situation, we're typically putting it in the breasts to temporarily expand the breasts. You might want to do that for any number of reasons, right? There are lots of different reasons. Not all the reasons are obvious. Some of them are obvious, right? Some of them are, fun. Right. Some of them can be sort of emotionally therapeutic. Some of them are exploratory. I learned how to do this from an anesthesiologist who worked for a plastic surgeon. I'm not sure if it still is, but I know about 10 years ago, it was a common practice in plastic surgery practices that did breast augmentations, that when people would go into a plastic surgeon and say, I want breast augmentation surgery, one of the ways they would vet whether somebody was a good candidate for a surgery would be that they would do a saline infusion, so that you could try them out first, right? So
sorry. Just
so
the way you said that,
well, and that's the way he said it, right? And so an individual would come in and say, "Oh, I want 800 cc implants, in each breast," and they, the surgeon would go, "Are you sure?" And oh yeah, this is what I really want. Okay, well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put you on the table, and we're gonna infuse 800 cc's of saline in each of your breasts, and then we're gonna send you home, and then we're gonna rebook you for another appointment next week. And so next week you'll come back and you'll tell us how it was to have the infusions, right? And then you'll come back and you'll tell us, whether that was really what you wanted. Right. Okay. And then, and so it was kind of a way to, sort of, test drive, your new breasts, right? And so he had, been doing this for, 10 years, 20 or 30 people a week for years and years. And, so he was teaching people, in the body modification community and then the kink community, right, how to do it. Of course, he was a doctor, so he had a medical license, so he could do things like he could get local anesthetic, right, like lidocaine, and could make the process significantly more comfortable for a bottom. Whereas someone like me, who doesn't have the licensure to acquire such drugs, I just kind of have to raw dog it, right? Well, or my bottom does. I just watch.
I was going to say it doesn't hurt me at all.
No.
Yeah, you're on the same level there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done saline infusions into ball sacks. We've done that, and it's I've never done it to the extreme. I've seen some with like 1.5 liters in a ball sack, which I thought was insane. We've done one breast. We've done one into breast for a transformation, so into a guy's breast to give him proper boobs. Mm-hmm. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind me asking, because I now have the saline expert. How many needle points do you use to do a breast infusion? How many are you using one bag of saline and only one needle point, or are you splitting it over a couple of different bags and different needle points into the body? And then how long does that generally last for in your experience?
So if I'm going to do a pair of breasts, I'll typically hang one bag per breast. So like, and what size bag I use, because here, at least in the United States, if we're going to do, the bags will usually come in, the smallest bag you can get is a 250 mil. So that you'll usually get a 250 mil, 500 mil, 750 mils are not that common, and then you can get up to a liter, right, 1,000 milliliters, or a mil, or a liter, right? If it's somebody who's brand new and their body itself is relatively small, I'll hang a 250 mil or maybe a 500 mil bag. If they're bigger bodied, or if they've done this before and they know how much they'll take, we'll hang a bigger bag. But I'll typically do one bag per breast, and usually just one infusion point. Okay. So one poke. Now, in the past, I've used IV catheters to do the infusion. So there's actually no needle in the breast. It's the little plastic catheter. Yeah. I've been having a lot of problems recently with the catheters getting blocked and kinked. Yeah. And so I'm actually considering maybe stopping that and going back to just using hypodermics. Shorter hypodermics. Because the catheters are starting to become kind of problematic. I use them mostly because for the comfort of the bottom, right? Because they find it's more comfortable for them to have a catheter in their skin than them having a needle, in for an extended period of time. But more and more, I'm just having problems with the catheter not getting kinked or blocked, and then of course having to unblock that or having to redo it just makes the infusion take longer. And especially if you're going to infuse a lot of fluid, the infusions can already take a longer period of time. And so yeah, I'm thinking that I might start going back to using just plain needles.
Yeah, we found that when you do the scrotum, that your entry points are quite important, because obviously it hangs and then the weight pushes the saline out. So deciding where your entry point is quite important for the length of time it's going to stay in and how wet the bed is going to be the next morning. So that type of thing is quite important.
A couple of the videos I've watched of men self-administering the scrotal infusions, I've watched them in the course of it. They'll move it. They'll redo it a couple times. And I mean, I don't. I can imagine that if you wanted to be more precise about where the saline goes, I could see doing that. But to me, the trade-off is, the more holes you're poking in someone, right, the more vectors you're creating for infection, right? And so my goal is to try to not poke more holes than are necessary. At least in the breasts, right, the saline will settle, right? So wherever it goes into the body, it's not where it's going to stay, right? So I want to try to put it in as close to where I think it should go, right? And you get to a point when you do it enough where you can kind of look at the anatomy and you can see where you think there is going to be room to fill in, right?
Yeah.
You can kind of look at the breast and go, okay, I think that there's probably going to be room on the outside for it to fill in, right? So maybe I'll try to place the needle more towards the outside rather than towards the inside. But yeah, you have to take gravity into consideration. I mean, the IV tubing works with gravity, so you're already having to take that into account anyway. But yeah, the placement of it from the breast perspective is not nearly as important for the success as much as the timeliness. Meaning, if you put the needle opposite of where the saline is going to end up going, it just means it's going to take longer for the saline to settle to the place where it ultimately needs to go. So getting it right the first time does help, but it's ultimately not a deal breaker. But I've done scrotal infusions a couple of times. And yeah, getting the placement right for that is much more critical, mostly because there's not as much real estate to work with there, right? And because of the geography of the anatomy there, and because you're not working with an area of the body where there's a lot of tissue to hold the needle in place, right? Like if you're talking about the breast, right, it's, basically muscle covered in fat, covered in skin, right? With the scrotum, it's basically, like a thick water balloon, right?
Yeah, when you said they're moving the needle around, like in my head, I'm trying to picture why they would want to do that. Because to be honest with you, if you get the first placement correct, the saline's gonna fill the sac. It's kind of gonna go there anyway, and gravity's eventually gonna help you. And when you filled it to the maximum extreme, it's gonna carry on up the shaft.
I mean, my what I gather is that they'll start like on one side, and then they'll move it to the other side. I guess because they want the other side to fill up more quickly rather than wait for it to move to the, but once again, my experience it would be that that's really, you're risking another hole, right? Another
100%.
Vector for infection for some, what I would consider at least negligible increase or decrease in infusion time, right? Like how much faster are you going to get to the end result by doing that, right?
Oh, it's just opening the drip. Personally, let it run 2 seconds quicker.
It's kind of like, what do they say? A watch pot never boils. Right? Sometimes the fastest way to get things done like that are just to let it work. Right. 100%. To not screw with it. Right. Stop fiddling with it. Stop trying to make it go faster and just let the thing do what it does. Right. And trust 100%. that it's working. Sometimes you can fiddle and adjust and stuff your way into fucking it up. Right. And you should be able to feel if it's working. Like you'll know. Like if it's not working, you'll know that it's not working.
I think you would almost probably have to wait longer to see it in the breast than you would to see it in the scrotum. Like the scrotum, you can see it pretty quickly. Like you said, the real estate's not enormous. It's designed, it's kind of designed to stretch a little bit. You have a little bit more skin down there.
Well, with the breast, like you can feel it right away because you've got nerve endings in the tissue. So when the infusion starts, you feel it. It's uncomfortable.
Like a good uncomfortable or a bad uncomfortable? I'm trying to picture it in my head. I have implants, so I would never do it to my boobs, possibly because I don't think they need to be any bigger than they already are.
Most people describe it as kind of anything from kind of like a bee sting, so kind of like a perpetual sting, to kind of like being poked kind of hard at the spot over and over again for an hour and a half. The other thing to consider is you'll be able to see it because the infusion happens more quickly than your body can disperse the saline. So what happens, well, it's not absorption yet, but just the dispersion of it. So it creates a big lump at the infusion site. So you actually get what looks like a knot. Like, if you ever hit your head and you had like a big lump, right? So you can see the lump where it's just a big lump of saline waiting to be dispersed by your body, right? So for sure. And plus, once it gets a certain level of full, your skin starts to stretch.
I have to say it's a very cool thing to see. One of my favorite things with the saline infused sac is to take a light and shine it up from underneath.
Yep, and then it looks like a jack-o'-lantern.
Yeah, and then you take a black eyeliner pencil and you can draw your jack-o'-lantern pictures on it, and you can make your own pumpkin. You can see we don't get pumpkins in Africa. We have to make our own.
The first time I saw that was the first time I learned it. The guy got 1.5 liters.
Jeez, that's a lot.
And he was he had to waddle back to his car, right? Because he had it done, and then the demo was over, and like everyone left, right?
Go home now.
So he had to go home, right? So he was wearing sweatpants, like jogging pants, right? And so like after it was done, his scrotum is like, the size of a basketball, right? Like it's huge, right? And so like, he's not walking regularly, right? Well, the next day, like he and his girlfriend, I was there from out of town, right? And he was local. And he and his girlfriend the next day were like, oh yeah, before you guys leave, right? We should go have breakfast. Like we're local and we know the good breakfast spot. And so when you guys get up in the morning, text us and we'll meet you guys for breakfast, right? So the next morning we wake up and we check out of our hotel and stuff, and we text the girlfriend and we're like, yeah, you guys want to meet for breakfast? And she's like, sorry, we'll have to meet you guys the next time. He's not getting out of bed. And we're like,
gonna borrow my skirt.
And we're like, let me guess. So he didn't have a lot of absorption overnight. And she's like, nope, not much at all. It's like he's laying in bed and like basically no absorption. Like he went to bed last night and he woke up this morning and it's still like his legs are still splayed open in bed. And like she said his nutsack is still ginormous. Like he's gonna be in bed. He's gonna be in bed all day. Right?
I love that.
And so I was like, all right, cool, but yeah, like one of the things that I learned was that like that is very popular in at least here in the United States among the gay male community.
Yeah, very here too, very much.
Because it enhances anal sex.
Oh wow! I didn't know it enhanced anything except the testicles themselves.
Well, because it's added force.
Okay.
Right. So like if you're one, it's an aesthetic thing. Your testicles is part of your masculinity, part of the aesthetic. Right, in terms of wearing the jockey, that aesthetic, but also if you're a man who is a male who is penetrating another man from behind, if you're gonna feel it. If the man in the back has a significant amount of weight, right, to push forward. It sort of adds to the effect, and so having a liter of fluid in your nutsack, right, as you thrust forward, adds a lot of kinetic energy. Right,
of its own. After the third thrust, you don't have to work anymore. It's doing it for you.
Like I think of the two balls hanging on the thing that clack. Yeah, but to answer your other question, so for the breast infusions, it'll typically last between 24 and 72 hours. Depending on your metabolism. I have partners that actually use it. You were talking about using it like as a hangover thing or whatever. My partners actually use it as a prophylaxis before they party.
Okay. Huh,
so
interesting.
So I have a partner, and so I taught my metamor, right, how to do it so that he can give an infusion to my partner so that when she goes out drinking, she doesn't have to worry about hydrating while she's drinking because her body is self-rehydrating while she's out drinking.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because she's just put like a liter of fluid in her body that her body is now actively absorbing.
That's clever. I have to say I'm not quite sure what the kids are doing with the saline. That they could be doing that. I'm old and I'm very out of that community, so I don't have the exact information. I just know that my medical shop lady tuts and shakes her head and pulls really weird faces when I ask for saline, and she's now happy to sell me a couple of bags because I think she realizes that I'm not partying. I think I have that look about me that says I have 50 cats and I drink vodka on a Friday night on my own. I think she's happy.
Well, there was also a problem about 7 or 8 years ago where, at least on this side of the planet, there was a major hurricane that hit the Caribbean, and all of the manufacturing, at least on this side of the planet, for saline, bagged saline, was done in factories in the Caribbean, and all of the factories were affected. Okay. So there was a huge shortage.
Okay.
Like in this hemisphere, because the factories that bagged and manufactured all of it, and sterilized it and everything, were all at low capacity or had been shut down, and so there were huge shortages in the legitimate medical supply chain. That any leakage into the gray market, right, was non-existent because even legit medical places couldn't get it here for a long time. I don't know if that I don't know if that affected you guys over there. If the supply chain,
I have to say, I think the saline we get is manufactured locally, and I would hope so. Looking at the cost of it, I would imagine it's manufactured locally. Anything that is imported from the US costs the price of one kidney. Just from a shipping perspective, we have a terrible shipping problems in this country to get stuff out of the port and to get stuff into the country. So if our country hadn't, by this stage of their existence, managed to make their own saline, there is no hope for us. But it's possible. But also just looking at what we pay for it in the shops, it's pretty cheap. So I would imagine that there is no postage added onto that product's cost, because anything with postage here is, you literally, like, I have to sell a kidney to get something from the US at the moment. It's ridiculous. Rob, I've had an absolute amazing time chatting to you. I'm so glad we finally got to connect. What's coming up in your life? Where can people see you teaching, and what exciting things are you planning for the near future?
So let's see, teaching wise. I'll be at Southeast Leatherfest in Atlanta in June. I'll be in Austin, Texas at Gwen Bash in June as well. I'll be in July. I'll be in Denver, Colorado. And let's see, most of those events, I think I'm going to be doing staples, sutures and pseudo suturing, saline. In Denver, I'm going to do some blood impact. So that'll be pretty fun. Pretty much just teaching for the rest of the year, doing a little bit of science, updating a lot of the educational resources on my website. Got lots of great feedback from Reign of Blood, so had me rethink a lot of the research that I've done. And, so I had this whole big cut list of, oh man, we got to research this and update this and look at this. So I've been doing a lot of that too. So yeah, pretty much it. Just, traveling, teaching, making sure that we get this information out there and try to help people have fun and be safe.
I love that. And while I have you online, I'm going to ask you if you're joining us for our Halloween Reign of Blood special.
So I'm not sure whether I've considered whether I wanted to do some sort of performance. I haven't decided yet whether I want to do something, because I want to do something, but it's going to require some engineering, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to figure it out in time.
We're hoping you are, because we're all very much fans, and we would miss you so much if you went with us for the festival. So we're hoping that we can nudge you gently in the right direction to come and join us.
I'll see what I can do, but I plan to attend, even if I'm not performing or teaching or anything, because it was a great time being involved in it either way. So even if I just get to watch what other people come up with, I'll certainly be involved.
We love that. Thank you, Rob, and thank you for your support of Reign of Blood and support of the community. We really value your expertise, and just your kindness and your willingness to be approachable is hugely valued. And thank you for the chat tonight. I've loved talking to you.
Thank you.
And to all my listeners, I hope you enjoyed this half as much as I did. And I hope you have a sharp rest of your week. From my dungeon to yours, lots of love and kitten kisses.